We had just 2 days ago the formal president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, coming out with a very, very stern, depressing analysis of the European economy, where he's basically going to say that unless you do my program, which is pretty radical by European standards, you're first going to feel agony and then pain. And you know, that's the former central bank president talking here, which is that Europe is on a long-term path of very, very weak underlying growth, weak GDP per capita growth, weak productivity growth, weak performance in the R&D sector, weak performance in corporate investment.
But Fredrik, at the same time, Europeans are happy. They have a high standard of living, amazing healthcare, long vacations. I mean, what's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, long vacations, that may be true, but I don't think Europeans are happy. I think we are seeing a lot of resentment, a lot of frustration at the ballot boxes, and we've been doing that for quite some time. I think the rise of populism plus many other things, which of course happens both on the right and the left, is certainly a result of the fact that we live in a European economy with low economic opportunities, where we almost are permanently demoted to have low economic expectations. Difficult to get a place to live, a house if you're a young person. Unemployment among young people are pretty high. We see demographic developments are not going to be helping us much, because we're going to push up cost for pensions and push for cost for healthcare, while we don't have sort of enough labor in order to substitute for those going into retirement. So I'm pretty pessimistic about the European economy.
Now, as you gentlemen talk about China, the United States, and Europe, it almost seems, and especially if you read the press and listen to the speeches, that we're moving to some kind of a new world order with trade blocs which don't talk to each other, almost Orwellian in its. But I understand if you look at the trade data, there's still enormous quantities of world trade going all around the world.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Are we at the end of globalization as we know it, or is that just a political smokescreen and really the data doesn't support that?
Well,
and I'll go to all of you. I think all of you might have an opinion on this one.
But if I just, I think it's a political smokescreen. What is true is that when you look at trade in manufacturers, trade in goods, it's been basically going sideways since 2014, 2015. But that's not surprising, given that we are in a structural shift in the entire global economy, where we go towards services and we go toward much more tech-oriented type of cross-border flows and cross-border exchanges. And when we start to look at this world of new globalization, how knowledge, ideas, patents, technologies, digital services are crossing borders, I think we are on the verge of a new boom of globalization. Okay. It's just that a lot of people talking about it and sort of predicting the end of globalization, they are staring at old globalization. They're staring at sort of old trade in data.
Okay, let me go from you to Martin, and then to Dr. Cao, and then back to Bill. Martin, go ahead.
Well, there is a new globalization, and this new globalization is given by the concept of friendshoring, nearshoring, or allied shoring. That is to say, what happened with the Russia invasion to Ukraine, with the pandemic, is that companies want suppliers to be reliable. So what you have at this point is companies that are looking for suppliers that are closer, that are reliable, that will have long-term contracts. So for example, in the case of China and its relationship with the US, what you have seen is a diminishing of around 5% of Chinese export to the US, but wisely enough, the trade between China and Mexico, Mexico is used as a key supplier of the US, has increased by almost that amount or most. So what you see now is Chinese investments going into Mexico in order to supply the United States. So there is a different type of globalization, and that is given by the type of suppliers that you get. Interestingly enough, you mentioned, Mike, the IRA, the Inflation Recovery Act, which had nothing to do with inflation, but was mainly
it's the new Green Deal, right? Disguised as something else.
It was a Green Deal, basically. I mean, basically giving subsidies to companies that produce 80% of their products, of their goods, that go into the green economy. But interestingly enough, countries that have already free trade agreements with the United States. That is to say, if you produce a lithium battery that is done in Chile or in Peru or in Mexico that has already a free trade agreement, you got the subsidy of $7,500 of a car when you buy it in the United States. So I would say that there is a different globalization, that there is a different view of suppliers, and also what is over is the big trading agreements. Okay, the big sort of free trade agreements that we've seen of the European Union, free trade agreements with different blocs. We have had trouble in getting past a trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. So big trade deals are over. It's more localized, focused on the kind of supplier. One last word about what Professor Lee said. My point, and if you look at what the Fed policy is the Fed policy is a risk management approach. So they do a base scenario and then they do the balance of risk in order to maintain in that scenario. My point is that inflation is no longer a risk, but a slowdown is a risk, and that you cannot maintain such high interest rates when inflation is going down to personal consumption expenditure to 2.6%. You cannot have a real interest rate of 2.5%, 5.5% over. So my point is that now the risk, the balance of risk is more on a slowdown. You don't only see it in the labor market, but also in the earnings of companies. But coming down to trade blocks is a new globalization what we are facing.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay.
Dr. Cao, how do you see from China? Because there's an argument that says China, you know, the Americans see China as a threat. Chinese say we're just trying to do our own business. You know, how do you see China, and are we at the end of globalization?
Okay, I fully agree what Martin just pointed out to the shift of foreign trade from China. I guess in near future, whatever who take White House, the American policy to China wouldn't big change. That means they still will, they call small yard, high fence, by high tariff, section, or export control, whatever. But at the same time, yes, I want to point these strategy in some way play out